Good morning. We are in the middle of the Mittler Rebbe's Mimer, or coming to the close of the Mittler Rebbe's Mimer, I should say, on page 425. In the Maimorim of the Mittler Rebbe, the Chanukah Mimer, Mika Hashem Elokeinu, Hamagbihi l'Sheves, Hamashpili l'Irish, Shemayim Ba'aretz, which is based on the Mimer of the Alter Rebbe and Torah, which we've learned, and its explanation, its beer, which in turn is the foundational source text of a big part of the end of Hemshech Hayim Beis, which is why we're learning this. So both context as well as getting a picture of the answers and the flow of ideas, which were most likely been developed had the Rebbe Rashab continued writing and finishing Hemshech Hayim Beis. So let's sum up where we're at. This long mimer, which is essentially over 70 pages, began on page 361 and is going to end on page 434. So, 40, 39, and 34. So we're talking about around 75 pages, a mimer, which is quite common when they talk about the Mittler Rebbe. Alter Rebbe's Maimorim are 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, not much longer than that. And Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim are, in the context of Bina compared to Chochma, elaborate comprehensively, like we've seen here. So we've been learning this Maimer now for a few months. And of course, it adds, as I said, context and understanding of what the main objective here is, understanding Hemshech Hayim Beis. So the central theme of this Maimer has been, based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, really the cornerstone, you can say, of all of Avodas Hashem, of a soul coming down below, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, into a dark world, with the objective of illuminating this dark world, using all the tools and resources that were given. So firstly, the soul itself has a certain awareness, transcendental awareness of something greater than just physical survival. That's why the soul is compared to a flame. And specifically, the wick is like the divine soul immersed in the oil, which is the animal soul's intelligence, human intelligence, with the objective of turning that intelligence, instead of just serving one's selfish needs and the needs to survive and exist in this material world, to direct it and harness it to become fuel for something that is transcendent, which is divine. The divine love of Ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'shnei levavcha, b'chol levavcha, b'shnei yitzarecha, with all our heart, with both chambers of the heart, the right and left, and also the animal soul, that becomes fuel for what? For Ahavta, for loving God, for the fiery passion of not just the passions, instead of the passions of this material world and its pleasures and delights, but the passion for godliness. And that comes through the contemplation of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the unity, understanding that existence is not a self-contained existence. It comes from somewhere, and it's energy that sustains it, that is the divine energy within it. And beyond that, there's the divine energy beyond existence, till we get to the third level of unification between Yichud Taton and Yichud Elah, that the very divine that sustains existence is also divine beyond existence. Nitfas ve'ena nitfas. That God contains the world, but the world does not contain him, and those two elements are all one. That's the ultimate understanding. We get to that point, so then existence itself is elevated into a state of awareness of the highest levels of what divine reality and truth is all about. The neshama, in turn, is also empowered with resources. Ner mitzvah v'Torah. Another verse where again the word candle is used. The mitzvah is like a ner. It too is God's will and God's plan of how to align this world to the divine, taking the physical world and turning it into a mitzvah. And that is also the wick immersed in the oil of this material world, Every mitzvah elevates the physical existence and in turn also helps us elevate our animal souls. And then we reach the level of Torah. And that, I should add, goes all the way up to the highest levels of what God's intention is. Seif Ma'aseh Machshavat Tchila, that the initial intention in the highest levels of the divine is to come down below, down in this world, and create Mi Kashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Achdus should come into this world, and we experience it in this material world. And that leads us ultimately to Torah Eir. Torah Eir is not like just the Ner Mitzvah. Ner Mitzvah, the Ner, like he explained on its own, without Torah, does not have that revelation, that revelatory power. Torah is the undiluted expression of the divine. A mitzvah, at the end of the day, the divine will is somewhat embedded and even concealed inside the action of the mitzvah. It is mamshich those high levels, but Torah gives us that full experience of the divine exactly as it's above. That's how it comes down below. As we learn, Ani Hashem Leishanisi, that Torah is atzmi, not just ner mitzvah, but atzmi. So all these combined together, the neshama, armed with mitzvahs and Torah, is what transforms this world and makes it into a dira b'tachtenim, a dira ta'atzmus, not just to divine revelation that relates to existence, but the divine that, and not just the divine that's beyond existence, but the beyond and within existence, all at one. So you have all the qualities of the best of all worlds here. You have the divine that relates to existence, divine beyond existence, and then even a third level that's higher than both of those. And that will be revealed in the future, Olam Haba, L'Asid Love, when the Yesh HaNivra, the Yesh in this existence will connect to the Yesh Amiti, and like he called it Dilug, and bypass all the levels in between. Bypass doesn't mean that they won't exist. It means the connection will be complete. Now, we still need, like the example of Riyah, the eye still needs an external light to be able to see in the dark. The neshama cannot just illuminate this dark world without Torah mitzvahs, because the neshama does not know how to live its life. You need a Torah, you need a Shulchan Aruch. You need a Torah Chochma Descends. You need Chochma, the wisdom of Torah, to clarify and separate and distinguish what's right, what's wrong, what's permitted, what's not permitted, what's a mitzvah, what's not, how to do a mitzvah, and so on. So, but L'Asid Lave, once that birur will be complete, then we will instinctively be plugged in all the way to the very essence of the source, and the whole Seder Shtalshus will be elevated to that as well. So that's a brief summary of the central theme of the Maimer in Torah and the Maimer the Mittler Rebbe elaborates, and of course, the basis of the Hemshech Ayin Beis. The only thing is in Ayin Beis, he does not conclude about the effect of this contemplation of Shema Yisrael, of Achdus Hashem, how it affects the animal soul, and does not conclude the topic of Ner Mitzvah Torah and everything that entails. But he does talk about the unification of both levels of unity. That's the end of Ayin Beis. So bringing it all together, the puzzle begins to emerge. As I said, when we finish this Maimer, I'm going to go back to Ayin Beis and show where we find all this in Ayin Beis, and it'll help us understand the ideas that the Rebbe Rashab started, especially in page 1350, is where the Rebbe Rashab really went into this discussion where this Maimer plays such a central role. Now, the final part of this is that this all connects to this pasuk in Tehillim, Hamagbihi l'sheva Mika Hashem Elokeinu, just like Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Mika Hashem Elokeinu, the uniqueness and exclusivity of godliness. But Hashem Elokeinu, not as it is in the Etzem, but as it comes down below, that we can bring Hashem Elokeinu, Hamagbihi l'sheves and Hamashpili lires, the joining of Magbiya, the elevation of existence, from the bottom up, all the way up to the highest levels where it's all rooted. Like I said, the beginning is wedged in the end. Seif Ma'aseh Machshavat Tchila. That when you do a mitzvah down below, it's a Magbihi l'sheves. It elevates everything up to that highest level. At the same time, also a Mashpili to bring it down into existence, Yosher, that it should also manifest, not just so-called suspend or strip ourselves from the structures of existence, but to draw Hamashpili Lirais, which we're going to learn more inside when we continue learning this Maimer, to bring it also down, and both of them join together. He's explained that Hamagbihi explained was Yichudei Law. Mashpili is bringing it down Yichudei Tata into existence, and they both come together, Hamagbihi and Mashpili. So why is it two levels called Hamagbihi and Mashpili? Because the goal is not to talk about it on the level of Atif, but in the structure of where there is Milo Mata, where there is a higher level and a lower level, where there's something to elevate and something to draw down into, that's where we want to experience this ultimate seamless unity that is beyond high and low, but it's within existence that we want to experience that. A taste of it was in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mokum HaOren Ein Min HaMidah, where space did not occupy space in the Holy of Holies, and the full-blown experience of this will be La'asad Lavet. That's summing up a big part of what we've learned, obviously in brief. And the last thing we learned is we asked the question on page 424, since Hu Atzmi is Baruch is higher than Emek Reim and Emek Tachas, than the both deis, and his answer is, because we're talking about not as it remains above, but as it comes down below in a state of structure where there is hierarchy and gradations and levels that are higher and lower. And that's Nesavid, that in that world, the Torah Mitzvos, as it comes down into the human body, in the guf, not just the neshama as it is in its root, and in this material world, that's what we should experience this. And that's what it means, Mika Hashem Elokeinu dafka, to the slapshus atzmis dein so b'Torah Mitzvos, lamata, kamoy lamayla ba'atzmei mamish, that the Havaya Elokeinu should be experienced down below, that the highest levels are one equal to the lowest levels, so that the very divine that expresses the pure divine in its purest form, that is one with the divine as it manifests within existence. And as I pointed out, this is, even though it's not exactly the same language, this is essentially what we learned at the end of Ayin Beis, why there are two levels of Ayin. Because the goal is to understand that God wants both dimensions. He wants the pure divine to be experienced on our terms as well, so we can relate to it in our existence. And that is the two Yuds of Hamagbihi and Mashpili. And he explained finally the last piece with mitzvahs. That's how mitzvahs work. That a mitzvah comes down below into the physical world. Every mitzvah is connected to some physical action, a physical part of the world, like tzemer, wool for tzitzis, or klaf, or parchment for tefillin. And it elevates that part of the world into becoming aligned with God's will. The wool, or the parchment, for that matter, everything in existence, our food, our drink, our work, everything in this material world, the mitzvah is elevated. But a mitzvah also has the other side, that it's also mamayla lamata, because zeireyat tzedakah, like he says, tzedakah teremim goy. Why? Because a mitzvah is also in the form of seeds. It's the divine seeds that God, the Rotzen Hashem, embedded and infused within all of existence. Our job is to perform the mitzvah and reveal that spark, reveal the divine will within each aspect, as he said. So you have tzedakah terem gesha close a mitzvah b'shem tzedakah. So there is a shazriya heichsodim, the hay of Yosha shenimishal mitzvahs from my lamata, like in a form of zriya, like someone planting. So God plants these seeds, but then we have to now harvest. We need to work the field and work the garden and make sure that we can reap. That's the tzedakah, as he said, to reap and ultimately harvest far more than what was planted there. And that's like God lifting us up on his arms. So you have here too a yerida and an aliyah and a yerida. You have both. And I believe that's where we stopped, which is around 2/3 down the page, 425. And as I pointed out, the parentheses supposed to end after the words Ein Sof Mamish. So the line L'goy the Neshamas Yisrael, Ba'atzmos Ein Sof Mamish is where we stopped. And I'm already going to continue from there. Now you could see right here, just from this summary that I just gave, how this fits right into the central theme of Ayin Beis, interface. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about interfacing the divine and existence. It's the central theme of all of Ayin Beis, from the beginning, all the way through the 1,474 pages that Ayin Beis entails. All of that is that ultimate theme, as we've talked about many times. The interface both from the bottom up, from the top down. And all this is coming together. When you see this mimer, you see how it connects directly to that theme in Ayin Beis. There's still more details to cover, which is the whole point of Riyah, of vision, which we'll talk about. We haven't got to that yet. I've mentioned a number of times, but I'm going to elaborate on that. And there is between Tefillah and Torah, which is also a part of this discussion, Mitzvos, Torah, and Neshamas. And so we have more to go. But as I said, I think the wise way is to continue learning this mimer, finish it, and then take everything we've learned and bring it back to Ayin Beis and see what have we uncovered and what can we suggest would be the continuing flow of what Ayin Beis would have been had the Rebbe Rashab continued writing. So that's a summary. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody wants to clarify anything about these general points I just made. Okay. So
Yeah,
the line.
I have a question. If Torah's or Atzmi, I thought we were trying to get to have a relationship with God on His own terms. We on our terms, our own terms, and have an interface with God on His own terms. This yichud law and yichud tata, the yichud law of connecting with Atzmus, is that, or if Torah is or Atzmi, but Torah itself is really not godly on his own, because it's Torah deals with Moshe Rabbeinu and Jews and Eretz Israel. It's dealing with us, the world. So is that considered Atzmis itself, this Torah which is or Atzmi on the Yichud law?
Well, Atzmus itself is higher than Yichud law too.
Yes.
It joins Yichud law and Yichud tata. That's number one. Depends what context you're talking about. In Torah itself, we've also learned this Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. And Torah Shebiksav is more on divine terms. Torah Shebal Peh is more that we can understand and a working blueprint. Like he gave the whole example that Torah Shebiksav is more like the blueprint that the architect creates, and Torah Shebal Peh is developing that blueprint that the contractor develops into a working document. So in Torah itself, you have two levels. Generally speaking, compared to mitzvahs and compared to davening for short tefillah, Torah is giving us a snapshot of God's mind and God's thinking. And that's why Anon Nafshik Sovisav is God infused himself in Torah. So Torah gives us an undiluted picture of the divine, Torah. But then the Torah translates it into a blueprint that tells us how to live our lives, and that's the mitzvahs part of Torah, or the part of Torah that teaches us about the mitzvahs. This is what he spoke about as well. Torah itself has levels. Now, a Torah alone, without mitzvahs, doesn't have the other part, which is to bring it into existence. So you really need all these different pieces. Every part brings another component into it. And the neshama, without Torah mitzvahs, without a neshama, doesn't have an agent, doesn't have someone implementing it. It would be like God writing a blueprint, and even a blueprint that is a working document, but who's building the building? The builder here is the neshamas. I'm not talking about the building of creating existence. The building of a dira b'tachtenim. Who builds the Mishkan? The human beings. They take the gold, silver, and copper, and they build a Mishkan. They build a Beis Hamikdash, or in general terms, a dira b'tachtenim. So you need all these pieces are all part of the picture here. In general terms, and I'm going to talk about this a lot more later when we get back to Ayin Beis, tefillah is usually mamata lamayla in this context in Ayin Beis. Torah is mamayla lamata, and mitzvahs is a combination of mamayla lamata and mamat lamayla, because on one hand, it's mislabish and gashmis. Torah is not mislabish and gashmis, really. I mean, yes, it's letters on parchment, and it has words and it can be understood, but it's not like a mitzvah that is specifically in wool or parchment that when you write a tefillin and so on. And so mitzvah is a combination, and all three are needed: tefillah, Torah, and mitzvahs. That's Torah, Vedic, Mils, Chasadim. We'll talk about that a lot more. So in that context, Torah is much more reflective of the divine in a way that preserves its pure integrity. Like he explained, Torah, exactly as it is above, that's how it is below. We have to reveal that through our learning, but Torah, that's what Torah gives us. A mitzvah does not have quite that level of oir. That's what he said clearly. That's why it's called ner mitzvah, not Torah oir. That he learned earlier, that we learned about, elaborated earlier. To really get the picture, I think you have to go back to the earlier pages and see how he builds it out. And each part is necessary. So that's a general picture of it.
So that yichud, there's that third level that we want to ultimately reach, which is above the yichud of the two, the third level, even higher than that. There's a level of God that's, even this yichud of Das Takton and Das Elyon is dealing with God as a creator. Whereas we said your mashal that you've used all the years of God being a creator or the artist, that's a lower level. It's not Atmos itself. That's a lower level, right? So there's are we going to be out
But
in
the level, yeah, but the level of Atmos is where God is both nitfas v'lei nitfas. Were you in the last few classes where I elaborated what means nitfas and not nitfas?
One of them, not the second.
So that is Atmos is essentially the ability to join the paradoxes. We don't have that capacity on our own because we live in a world of structure. It's either bligvul or gvul. It's either finite or infinite. It's either contained or not contained. To say mokam aron ein min amida, that it's space but also not space, that God is contained in the world but the world does not contain him, and it's all one. While he's being contained, he's also not contained. That is a pure Atmos experience. So that is not just Yechudei Elah. Yechudei Elah is the second one, is the God, the divine beyond existence. Then there's divine within existence. That's Das Elyon and Das Tachton, respectively. And then there's the joining of the two. This takes us back to the pages we learned in Ayin Beis. I had recommended several times, and we actually Yitzchok posted on our group, the classes I gave when I discussed at length what is this third level of unification. But to be very frank, you can't understand or relate to the third level if you don't relate to the first two levels. There's no way to jump there. It's just not possible. And it's not, and philosophically, it's not going to work. It's not a philosophical idea. You have to go through it. Just like you can't teach a child how to master the understanding of the teacher that comes after 40 years without learning Aleph Beis first. So first you have to learn the Aleph Beis on your terms. Then you come to understand God on God's terms. And then you come to understand God that's beyond even God's terms, meaning the divine that's beyond and within at the same time. And that is the challenge, because it doesn't make sense for most of us to understand. Is it finite? Is it infinite? Is he contained? Is he not contained? We say it's both, nitfus and not nitfus, as one. So that's where, to really understand that really is only through avodah, because it's not really understandable. It's a paradox. It's like saying, it's like saying literally two opposites at one. Does God relate to existence or does he not relate? And the answer, both. That while he relates, he also does not relate. And while he does not relate, he also relates. Not such an easy thing to wrap your head around. So that's ultimately where we get to. That's why it took thousands of years of avodah to acclimate ourselves, to refine ourselves, to expand our containers, where a paradox is no longer a paradox. So this is what you're trying to understand. I would say you have to go back and learn earlier in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, especially in Ayin Beis, the end of it, the last 3-4 pages. And I've, of course, given a lot of classes on it. That's the only way. I mean, it takes, I would say it takes years to really, I don't say the word master it, but it takes years to begin to really get a taste and experience of what this may feel like. Because, as I said, we are defined creatures, mortal creatures. We can experience, I talk sometimes about being absorbed, where you lose yourself in the reality of something greater than yourself. But even that's not ultimately it, because of this, because we want it to be both something that we experience, but it's also something beyond our experience. And that takes, as I said, most of us experience things on our terms. Then at times we can have an experience of something beyond our terms, on God's terms, when you completely lose yourself in the experience, like being absorbed, dissolved, complete bittul. But then how do you bring it back into your existence while also being beyond existence. That's the ultimate, obviously, that third level that we're talking about.
Can I ask you a question about language?
Let me just, Eliezer, is that clear or you need
Yeah, I
more?
know. That's definitely. I'm just my mind's going through like quantum thinking. This whole revelation of quantum mechanics, and so
Yeah,
in
but
our
I'll tell you
last
something. This
100 years.
is where quantum meets non-quantum, because quantum is state of indeterminism. This is where determinism meets indeterminism. Quantum has never talked about that. As a matter of fact, they cannot reconcile the quantum microscopic view of physics with the macroscopic rules where things are very determined, laws of gravity and so on, where things are very much cause and effect. And indeterminism, that's why Einstein had a problem with the indeterministic part. He had no problem with the deterministic part. So really, this is ultimately joining indeterminism and determinism, if you want to use language of physics.
Great, that's true. Okay, and last question before she'll get her question. Is there a promise in the Torah that in Lasid Lavo we will be able to internalize this level of indeterminism and determinism together?
It's not a promise. It's a natural result of us becoming so permeated with godliness that we can experience it. So it's more than just a promise. It's actually the end result of all the avodah, all the mesiras nefesh and sacrifices and pain and suffering that we went through to transform and refine ourselves, refine and transform ourselves. That is he says it clearly. If you look on top of page Tav Chav Hey, 425, yesh yesh mi yesh amiti, that the yesh below will experience the yesh above. That's a joining. When the Rebbe speaks yesh amiti, will be one with the yesh nivra. So the answer is yes.
Thank you.
But then we also spoke kulam yedu esi miktanim ad gdelam. That still will not mean there won't be distinctions between one person and another. You may experience this etzem different than I will. It's also part of the equation. Yeah.
My question is directly related to this, that life is messy and circular, and it's not like, so there's 2 points. One is that we're not going in a straight line. There are different parts of us that become refined and fall back down and chalik type of thing. And then there's also the idea that when one person breaks a certain midah or refines a certain midah, then it's easier for everybody else. Like if the Rebbe,
Yeah.
So my question on language is that we're always saying la'atid lavo in the future. Can we say instead la'atid lavo? Could it mean once this happens, then we have refined? Because there are different like ups and downs. Do you know what I'm saying? La'atid lavo could mean once we get there.
Not clear exactly what you're saying, but maybe this may help. La'atid lavo is not just a reward that is independent of our work today. The Alter Rebbe says it very clearly in the beginning of chapter 37 in Tanya. Very fundamental line, piece. He says that this gilui of Yemesa Mashiach Etchias HaMesim, when the divine will be completely revealed in existence, he says, Gilui Ein Sof Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi. There'll be the divine revelation in this material world. Dira b'tachtenim is tolui b'masenu v'avedesenu, is dependent on our work. It's not a separate entity. Like, you do your homework and God will give you a candy. He'll give you a reward. There, the reward is a second. It's a reward for what you did. Like he goes on, schar mitzvah mitzvah. The mitzvah itself is its reward, because every mitzvah reveals the divine. So when you accumulate all the mitzvahs of all generations and of all of us, and we combine it all together, accumulatively, each mitzvah is like a building block and releases a certain spark or divine energy. We don't really see or feel it so much, but ultimately affects the world. That's why the world is a more refined place. The Zohar says, as we get closer to Mashiach, the explosion of scientific knowledge, of Pnimius HaTorah, All that is not just out of the blue. That's because of years and years of hard work. That's why we have freedom today. That's why we have political, scientific, and other developments. That's what means when the Rebbe says, open your eyes, look at the world. The world is a far more refined place than it was. The values that the most of the world right now embraces were not embraced 500 years ago. The United States is the first institutionalized country that institutionalized freedom and rights. That's not an accident. So thousands of years of work has refined the world and brought more godliness, but it's like munach bekufsa is the expression of chassidus. Means it's all like locked in a chest. And when the Asad Lavi, it will then come, like think of a volcano. That will erupt, but it's not erupting out of the blue. It's thousands of years of energy that has accumulated and erupts at the end of the process, and that's called Geula. So Geula is Geula with an Aleph. It's the same world, and all the work we did is part of that's why Mashiach is not just an event. It's the end of a process. So the first time Adam and Chava did a mitzvah, they already began revealing Mashiach in this world. And since then, we're now 5,784 years later, every good deed from anyone, from the greats, great men and women, every person on earth ultimately adds and accumulates to the point that then it erupts in what we call Geula. So Geula is essentially the end result of a world that has refined itself and brought godliness into its actions. Every mitzvah we do, that sits us with the wall, that fill them with the parchment, you light a physical candle, near Shabbos Kodesh, near Yom Tov. Every mitzvah, charity, the money that we give, the food we eat, the drink, everything we do from the moment we awake, including our sleep, everything that's directed toward godliness is revealing, if you wish, the energy of Mashiach into existence. And Lashed Lavi is the sum total of it all. The structure that is created through all these building blocks.
The problem is that I feel like we're inside the eruption right now. And
that's when the Rebbe's words that we're at the end of the process and we're at the threshold. Yes, correct. That is
and
correct.
Also it says Go'al, Go'el, Yiga, like it says that, like we say in different places that Hashem already Go'al and is right now Go'el and will.
Yeah, but it's not. But as long as there's anyone that there's violence and murder and war and death, you cannot call this we call the Gula.
No, I'm not trying to. Right. I'm just saying that there are aspects that were already Nigal, and so for me, the language obvious. That would.
I just said technology itself, freedoms. Of course there are.
So I'm just saying that to say the words, well, once we get there, then that happens, rather than.
Well, I said it's a process. It's a process that began thousands of years ago, and fine. There's no problem saying that we're at the threshold. That's the Rebbe's words. Higias man gulaschem. We're at the threshold. We have to open our eyes. I mean, all the different expressions. Correct. When we say getting there, we're talking about halacha. The Rambam says the building of the third Beis Hamikdash physically, the gathering of all the Jews back to Israel, a world of peace, complete peace, and no famine, lo rav, lo milchama, lo kina, lo sachrus, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So to say we're close to it, say that we have a taste of it, absolutely. That's what's called Friday. You taste of the foods of Shabbos. So there's plenty of tastes, but there's still more to go.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
I'm talking about how the Avos were like Merkavas. Were they connected on that level that this gives us the hope that this is something that is actually humans have already achieved in a sense, I guess.
Well, when your parents whose DNA you carry have reached high levels of divine connection, it makes it part of your DNA. In chapter 19 in Tanya, chapter 18 and 19, especially 18, the Alter Rebbe says that the fundamental core love that we have for the divine is a Yerusha. It's an inheritance from the Avos. So there's no question we carry their DNA, their genes, their Avodah, they pass it on to us. And the same thing is with Moshe Rabbeinu, and the same thing with Matan Torah. Every revelation and every high level experience, higher consciousness experience that anyone experienced in the earlier generations gives us more strength. We are, as I said, it's accumulative. We are the midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. And you have to look at everything as a complete picture. We're not alone. We are not alone. We are part of that process. And then we have to add our little piece, whatever that may be. Each of us have our indispensable and unique mission. And it's all together. It's one large mosaic. So yes, there's why the Medrash says that a person has masa yigiu ma'aseh yodei l'ma'aseh avesai. When will my actions come to when will they be similar to the actions of my parents, of the others? So we're told that we get strength from them, but we also have to be realistic. No one's asking you to be Avram Avinu or Yitzchak or Yaakov or Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. You have to be you. Every person has to be, but we get strength and we are able to gain confidence from the fact that those that came before us, the pioneers that pioneered the way and they broke through, making it easier for us today. Look, again, we're not suffering. We're not standing right now where Jews were 80 years ago in Europe or a few hundred years ago, where we did not have the luxury of sitting and talking about this without being watched and possibly being arrested and possibly being killed and excommunicated and expelled and so on, all the things. So this didn't come from nowhere. This came from hard work that people suffered greatly for God, for their devotion to God, paving the way. So we're coming on a road that has been prepared for us, but we still have our job to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So let's continue. The line that begins L'goy b'neshamas Yisrael from the words V'zehu on page 425, which the pages, if you want to follow the text, can be found at ayinbeis.com. So Mittler Rebbe continues now. V'zehu Hamagbihi b'Yud. Remember the emphasis on the Yud, where he talked about earlier, the Yud is Chochma, the Yud is Bittel, the Yud is Lashon Nekeva, feminine, receiving, being a Keli, like he said on page 423. We spoke about the Yud, the Nukud of Ayin, that turns into becoming that our existence becomes like a kisei, a throne, Loshevis, that throne to the Yud of Chochma becomes a kisei for Atzmus, Hamagbihi. So that's what he says now, is the Hamagbihi with a Yud. Hamagbihi v'akavonahu. And the intention with that is Shemagbihi l'maylo l'bchinas hayud chochma, that it elevates things below, from below upward to the Yud of Chochma. So in other words, we live in this world and we're faced, just to put it very simple, balbatisha, practical terms. You're now faced with a choice. You are blessed with some material possession. You have a table, you have a chair, you have wool, you have gold, silver, copper. I'm just using that as an example. So you could either use it for your own selfish needs. That's more or less the nefesh habamis, fulfilling whatever it wants with those material objects or material experiences. You could be neutral, not use it not for you, but not for anything else, just neutral. Or you can direct it towards something positive. You take your gold and you build a beautiful ark, a temple, a Beis Hamikdash, a Mishkan. You take your gold, you give some of it to Tzedakah. You give it as truma, meiser of your produce to the Kohen, to the Levi. In other words, you're sanctifying and making a mitzvah out of your material reshus, divrei reshus, like he explains in Tanya. You eat and drink, and you turn that into the strength that you get from that. You use to help other people. So you've taken the material world and that's a Hamagbihi, and where have you elevated it to? You've elevated, he says, to the Yud, the B'chinas HaYud, the Chochma, to the Yud of Chochma, which is what is Chochma? Chochma is the spark, the divine Yud, that in it God told us how to use this world. That's the Chochma of Torah. Sheyeded lamata levarer. That Yud of Chochma came down below to be mevarer and clarify for us. So the Torah says, here's what you do when you're blessed with gold, silver, or copper. Here's what you do with wool. Here's what you do with other materials in your life. Here's what you do with your home. You make your home into a divine dwelling. And you teach that to your children. Essentially, every part of your physical life should be elevated. So the Chochma of Torah is Chochma Bariru. That Yud comes down below. And when we do that mitzvah, we're actually elevating. That's the Magbihi, not just Magbihi, but Magbihi with the Yud. You're elevating it to the Yud, L'bchinas Yud, the Chochma, which came down to clarify and tell us what to do in this physical world. So that's Hamagbihi with the Yud. The Inyan HaLaw of Agbo Zu, and this elevation and lifting up, brings to mind an interesting story that you probably heard. I've repeated a number of times when Rabbi Yosef Weinberg was one of the students that came from Atfotsk in Poland when the Frierdiker Rebbe was there, and he came over with many people from the Polish Chassidim that became Lubavitch Chabad. So he worked for the yeshiva. He had connections. He was a big fundraiser for the yeshiva. He had connections to a lot of very well-to-do people, including Safra, Edmund, and Joseph Safra of the Safra family. So he once wanted to bring a note to the Rebbe. Someone needed something. Someone needed a refuah shleima, I think. It was something urgent. The problem is he came late, and the Rebbe was already preparing to go home. Those years, the Rebbe would go home 11, 12 o'clock, usually around 12 o'clock, midnight. So he brought that note, and he put it into the secretary's the office, the box that would go into the Rebbe. They told him that the Rebbe the last mail had already been delivered to the Rebbe, and it has to wait for tomorrow. But he said it's urgent, it's an emergency. And no one's going to go knock on the door of the Rebbe. So the suggestion was made to him that he should take the note. And because Rabbi Chadakov was the Rebbe's chief of staff, he was by the Rebbe. At the end of the day, he would always go in. He was the last person by the Rebbe. He was already by the Rebbe in his room. So he was suggested, to Rabbi Weinberg, put the letter in the, what is it called? Like between the door was closed. You stick it in by that, the space. There's a name for it. The
mail slot?
Not the mail. There was no mail slot. Between the door and where the mezuzah is. What is it called? The post. You stick an envelope between the door and the crack of the door, basically. And so when Rabbi Chadakov comes out, the letter will fall, and he'll see it, and he'll give it to the Rebbe. Okay, Rabbi Weinberg did it, and he was standing on the side and waiting. What happened was, Rabbi Chadakov came out. Actually, no, Rabbi Chadakov followed the Rebbe. They thought Rabbi Chadakov would come out first. The Rebbe came out first. Rabbi Chadakov was behind them, and the Rebbe sees the letter fall to the floor. So he went down, the Rebbe picked it up, lifted it up, and then took it with him. Rabbi Weinberg was mortified because he felt he was matriach, causing the Rebbe to bend down, pick up his letter because he couldn't figure out a way how to get it to the Rebbe. So he wrote another note to the Rebbe, which was delivered in the morning, and he wants to apologize that as important as it was, that he caused the Rebbe to be matriach himself, or to exert himself, or agmas nefesh. I'm not sure exact word that he used. That to cause the Rebbe to bend down to pick up. He said in Yiddish, "Ufheben," to pick up the letter. And the Rebbe responded to him that there's no need for him to apologize. Harizeh kol inyoni. This is my entire purpose, my entire mission. Ufheben, to lift up, and especially things that other people overlook. In other words, things that fall down and other people miss and overlook. My job is to lift it up. That's what the Rebbe's answer was. So reading this mimer, I'm reading Halah Agba. I just came to mind the story. I just thought it would be nice to share. So that's what a Rebbe is. The truth is, all of us have this avodah, that everything in this world has sparks that were sent to this world from above, down below, with our job is to elevate it. This means whether it's elevating a person you meet by sharing with them a kind word. Some people's spirits may be down. They may be depressed. And you share something, you lift up their spirits. Or physically lifting someone that needs support. Or taking the sparks that we find that are locked or trapped, embedded in this material world. Everything is to lift up. Now, of course, a Rebbe does it in a unique Rebbe way. I thought it's a good story that captures this idea. So the inyan halah of Agba zu, hainu, this elevating and this lifting up, hainu lefi shirida zu letzerech aliyah. Because the Yerida, why was the reason that in the first place? Why did God send, so to speak, these sparks downwards from higher worlds? The divine sparks existed in a higher state, and they were put into this material world. And this material world is the lowest of worlds. So there's a reason. Because the purpose of the descent in the first place was in order for it to be elevated. Because the birurim of the 288 sparks, remember the sparks are many more than 288, but 288 general sparks, and then they branch off and break down to many more. The hipuch cheshech le'er lamata, when you transform the darkness to light. So when these sparks end up being embedded or trapped or locked in this world, they're like being held hostage. They're in a dark place. Until you don't reveal and elevate it, the spark is there. The spark is like, think of it like a spiritual opportunity waiting to be released. So when you do that, that then in turn elevates above in the light that precedes the darkness in the first place. If you recall earlier, we learned that there's a darkness, there's a light that comes after the darkness, there's a light that is completely beyond darkness, defies darkness. So when we come down below the kavanah, when we do our Aveda, we're not just eliminating the darkness and we're back to a spark, we actually elevate it to a place that's higher than the Cheshech Elyon. You remember the Cheshech Elyon was that first symptom. She is Gala Mehelome, the stimid, the kol stimin. We go all the way back to a level that would be revealed from its concealed state, from the stimid, the kol stimin, the covering of all coverings, the concealment of all concealments. Doesn't use the word helam ha'atzmi here. I'm not sure if that's the same level, but it's definitely a level that is higher than regular Ur. It's an Ur that comes when you're able to reveal the purpose by the purpose of every part of existence through elevating the spark. It reaches that higher state. So basically, the Hamagbihi is not just Magbihi that you elevated something back to where it started. You get to a higher place, because that was the whole kavanah of the cheshech in the first place, to come down into this world and elevate it. And when you elevate it, you're going all the way back, like we learned, that you go back much deeper, because the light that comes out of darkness is always deeper than the light that's on its own. V'zeu dafka AdHamtz Bereishis shenikra Tzedakah. And this happens dafka through physical mitzvahs that are called tzedakah. Like we learned earlier, zarei tzedakah with a hay. We learned about the yud and the hay. We'll soon discuss that more. It's called tzedakah. Kamoi, like we see, what does tzedakah do? So tzedakah, physical tzedakah, is kamoi tzedakah lahachis ruach shvalim. You vivify, you energize the spirit of those that are downtrodden. Ruach shvalim, the spirit of the downtrodden ones, people who feel lowly. So when a person gives someone tzedakah, it's not just giving them enough to provide for them. A person is impoverished. Poverty breaks the spirit. It's demoralizing. Sometimes oni chashiv kemes even. A pauper is compared to a dead person. And when you give someone tzedakah, you are bringing life to them. Lahachis ruach shvalim. We learned this earlier. Hachis ruach shvalim. So what are you doing? You're bringing alive. You bring ruach shvalim. Shezeu ligmel chesed l'dalim dafke. That is the process of ligmel chesed when you offer chesed l'dalim to the poor. Dafke. That is hachis ruach shvalim. That elevates to a place that's even higher than regular light. So now he's going to go back to the letters we talked about. Remember the Dalet, the Hey, and there's the Yud. So to make a Dalet into a Hey, you need to have a Yud. That's what he says in Torah. I mentioned that the other day. So that's the Magbihi. So Magbihi ends with Hey, then you have the Yud. He says the Yud is where you mamshich into Malchus, because Malchus on its own, less lemagamo klum, it's a Dal. He says, and when you give Tzedakah to Malchus, you're being mamshich the Yud into the Dalet, turning it into a Hey, which is what he says now. That Dal is referring to the letter Dalet. Less le megamo klum, that on its own has nothing of its own. It's like the moon without the sun. It has no light of its own. In order for it to have light, in order to have sustenance, you need to be mashpi, you need to transmit into it. Lahashlim chesrene, to compensate that which it's lacking. So a dal, literally, a person who has no money to pay for his own needs, is someone who has nothing of its own. When you give tzedakah to him, you're turning a dalet into a hay. That's why it's tzedek and tzedakah, the hay of tzedakah. U'kamoy maskil el dol lamtikei b'chsodim. So the pasuk maskil el dol is from Tehillim. What does it mean, maskil el dol, that you are being mamshich to the dal, to the person who's poor? Lamtikei b'chsodim, to sweeten him with kindness. It's like the sweetening of the bitter, sweetening of that which is lacking, the void. You're filling the void. V'zeu ikat inyan gemach. This is the main thing of gemilas chasadim. We say greimel chasadim, so you're being mamshach greimel dalim. The Gemara says that greimel dalim, gimel dalim is greimel dalim. You're giving to the dal, to the poor. He says like this. So he says, "Ligma shu ligma chesed l'dalim dafke," to give kindness to those that are poor, that are lacking. Shezeu esa gimel va'dalad. That's what the Gemara says in Shabbos. The letter gimel dalad, gimel dalim. To give to the dalim, va'dalu b'chinas esa dalad, and the dal is hinted to in the letter dalad. Ukishamaskil el dal. And when you mashpia, maskil from the word like mashpia to the dal, shu esa dalad, which is the letter dalad, hainu masha esa medalad hey. You're turning a dalad into a hey. Because you look at a dalad as two lines. You add, when you mashpia to it, so it's lacking. What happens when you bamshich the yud into the dalad? The left leg is like a yud, it turns the dalad into a hey. So it's returning a dalad b'chinas esa dalad, and you turn masha esa medalad hey, b'tzdaka zu. With its tzedakah, you're turning the dalad into a hey. Shu hey chsadim, the hey kiyadua. That's the hey chsadim that we referred to earlier. Remember, we spoke about the hey chsadim of Er Yashar. So he spoke about hey chsadim. The hey chsadim is hey, 5. It's referring to this letter hey that you've turned through chesed, you've turned the dalad into a hey. Okay. Let's continue. He continues to elaborate. Yudua, and it's now known. The ikar hefresh ben eis dal and eis hey. The primary difference between the letter dal and the letter hey. Ein rag b'mashu b'eis hey regel hakotzer shaba. It's not just that in the eis hey. The difference is it has that regel hakotzer, which means the small leg. So the dalet has a line on top, then a right leg, then there's a small leg. Regel hakotzer would mean a small leg would be like the left yud that makes the dalet into a hey. Shehu b'tzir yud ktana levad. So it's not just the technical element of having a letter yud, that's like the left leg that turns a dalet into a hey. It's more than that. Next page, 426. V'nimtze. So I'm just wondering if you already answered. He's saying it's not only. Look, let me continue. Let's see. V'nimtze. And from this we derive. Kishareitze lasis medal hey. That when you want it to convert a dalet into a hey, ein meisev rak esay yud ktana b'teich dalet. V'nasit suda says hey. All he has to do is add the small yud, and from that turns a dalet into a hey. And actually, when a scribe writes a dalet, that's how he writes a dalet. First, a hey rather. He starts by making a dalet, and then he adds that yud. The zeu inyan gemel dalim, the chesed the hey b'tzedakah canal. And this is the meaning what we said before, the giving to the poor, with the chesed of the hey of tzedakah. The hainu masha'esa medalet hey b'yud ktana shaba canal b'dal. That's the process. I think what he's saying here is that's not just a technical thing. You add a little dot and turn it into a. It's an avodah. I think that's what he wants to say. It's an avodah that you're adding, actually being mashpia, amshacha, into the dal, turning it into a hey, with a yud ktana shaba canal, as we mentioned before, v'dal lemevi. The language is a little, because first he started saying that it's enei rak. You could, if you force it, you could say ein rak. It doesn't mean it's not only. It could mean it's only that. In other words, it's not a difficult thing to make a dalet into hey. Not sure what he's emphasizing here in this few lines, but one thing is for sure: the process of making a dalet into hey is that you have to be mamshich the yud. Now here he doesn't talk about the yud as bittul. So yud here sounds like you bring mamshich chochma. That's the amshacha that tzedakah in general does, and mitzvos in general, which are called tzedakahs. Mitzvahs called tzedakah because that's what a mitzvah does. It takes something that on its own, it's in a darkened state, the material world, and you're revealing the godly spark within it. And that makes a dalet into a hay. Now, for the record, this is also talked about in the Maimer Basel Legani, the famous Basel Legani of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Yud Shvat, Tavshin Yud, which the Rebbe would explain every year. So in the chapters, I believe, chapters 7, maybe 6, 7, we start talking about the letters there, Kuf and Reish. He talks about Dalet and Hay as well, this theme, just as an aside. Okay, with that, we conclude the paragraph on top of page 426. Let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
Can you also do that with people? I mean, when go back to
Why not? When you say a kind word to someone who feels very down and downtrodden or oppressed, you're b'mamshech them and you're elevating them. I mean, tzedakah here means monetary, but tzedakah is also can be through words, through comforting someone, through support, through actions. Why not? I mean, he's talking very general terms here. He's not speaking not limiting it.
Yeah. What about somebody who's harmed you in some way? Does that also?
You think that's the theme of this mimer? That's a nice personal question, and it's a good question, but he's not talking about that.
I understand.
Should you be helping someone that it depends? If you help someone that harms you and that in turn also harms you, maybe you're not really helping them. So that's another discussion. Someone, why would you help someone that harms you? Maybe you should avoid them. Maybe you should. So I'd have to hear more details. I think that needs a discussion with your mentor.
Yeah.
Of figuring out, this is in general when he's talking about, of course, a healthy form of tzedakah where you're helping someone.
Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi.
Are there any questions on what we just learned, or it's pretty clear? I think it's pretty clear.
Maskil al-dal also means to teach someone, right? That's the tzedakah.
Yeah, from the word seichel, but maskil here also means to be mashpia. Okay, so let's continue further. So now that he spoke about how it's in tzedakah, he's going to go back to mitzvahs. V'kach mamish yuvan, the inyan mitzvahs, the new paragraph. And this will literally explain to us also how it works with mitzvahs. Shenikra b'shem tzedakah behei. Mitzvahs in general are called tzedakah. K'mesha kosev, that's from the word zereya. Zaru lachem l'tzedakah v'kotzrei. Like we said earlier, that you sow, you plant for them for tzedakah, and then you reap. Like we learned before about Erzarua, that mitzvahs are like seeds that we then plant, and after planted, we reap and cut. That was what was planted of the Erzarua, this light, this divine light, Erzarua l'tzadik. That's planted for this higher level of tzaddik. These are the chsodim, the kindness, the benevolence of Abba, of Chochma. And where is it being nimshach? From Chochma, the Yud of Chochma, the Bechinas HaMalchus, Shenikra Dal. This process is the process of drawing down from Chesed of Chochma of Abba to Malchus, which on its own is called Dal, impoverished or poor. Sho'ez Dalet the less lamagama klum. But the level of Malchus is the letter Dalet on its own that has nothing of its own. Less lamagama klum does and has nothing of its own. Ve'hein kol ramach mitzvosese. So what do these chsadim of Ava represent? So in specific mitzvah of tzedakah, it's tzedakah. But in mitzvahs, it's representing all the 248 positive mitzvahs. They are the Erzarua. These are the seeds, the divine seeds that God planted into our existence. Shein Gili Ratzon Elyon. That's the revelation of the divine will. Every mitzvah is God's will, whether it's a mitzvah of whatever mitzvah it may be. Shabbat b'chinas kelim mikelim shenim, and like the 248 mitzvahs, each mitzvah manifests itself in different ways. Some mitzvahs are in one part of the physical existence, others in the wool, in parchment, in the food we eat, in the drink, in our work. Everything has in it the mitzvahs. That's the kelim mikelim shenim. Various types of all kinds of diverse types of containers or channels. Al yedei shema the chochma de Torah. V'hein, yeah. Al yedei shema. How do they get to us? To the shema bitl of Torah, of the wisdom, the yud of Torah. Shemavara laban denega, because Torah clarifies for us. Birur, it clarifies and separates and tells us. Here's what you should do. Here's what you shouldn't do. Here's how you do a mitzvah. All the details of how these mitzvahs are done is coming from Shema, of the wisdom of Torah. Like we said, Torah Chochma is Koyach Ma, the bittul, the Yud of Torah. Shemavar Laban Nega, which clarifies and separates and refines the ban of that's in Klippas Nega. So the Torah is directing us. And how does it manifest in action? Through mitzvahs. Shehein ha-mitzvahs b'dvarim gashmim d'tatzcham kanal. So the Torah is telling us the guidelines. It's telling us, here's how you do a mitzvah. Here's how you keep Shabbos. Here's how you eat kosher. So this is manifested in the mitzvahs, which are all in physical matter, that consists of either daimim, semech me'ach chaim medaber, the mitzvahs that are in the mineral world, mitzvahs in the world of vegetation, like we learned earlier, how Torah Sheba'al Peh is connected to, like Masechta, like say the Zroim talks about Semeach. There are things that talk about Chai, animals. Chai. And Medaber, what a person is supposed to do, canal. This is the Yud of Chochma of Torah, sheyered lamata mata dafke. This Yud comes down below, the lowest levels. The B'chochma is beriru dafke, because it's Chochma that clarifies. If we didn't have wisdom, the wisdom of Torah, we wouldn't know. How would you know what's right and what's wrong? So there are things we could calculate on our own minds. We know we could figure out certain laws of morality. But most of the mitzvahs we would never know without the Chochmah, without Torah, Hashem telling us, here's what I want you to do. Who would ever figure out to put on tefillin? Or for that matter, to eat matzah? So this all comes from the Chochmah of Torah that's given the Yud of Chochma, sheyered lamata mata dafke, Chochma is beruda. V'zeu b'chinas Chochma de Torah er. This is the wisdom Torah that illuminates. The Torah is like a beacon of light, illuminating light. Sheba b'slapshus b'mitzvos maisis. That manifests the slapshus of that Torah. The Torah is the book that's like the operator's manual. It's like the blueprint. It tells you what to do. And the actualization of that is the mitzvos maisis, the physical mitzvahs that we do. But Torah, mitzvahs without Torah, the Torah has to teach us what mitzvahs to do and how to do them and when to do them. Like we learned earlier, ner mitzvah, the candle of mitzvah, and Torah, the air of Torah is actually what empowers the candle of mitzvah to give off light. That's the process from the top down, how mitzvahs are given to us. But now comes the performance of mitzvahs with the elevation, the Hamagbihi. This was bringing it downward. The Torah Chochma comes down into Malchus and brings that Yud. Now comes Aval Achar HaBirur Hazeh. But after we actualize this bitter, this clarity, and we actually perform the mitzvah, Milo Magbiya LiYud Zeh, we elevate, we raise, and we elevate the experience down below to this Yud of Chochma, Shu B'teicha Dalet, which is now placed in the Dalet of Malchus. Shenasa Yedezet Siyur Reis. And through this you get, from the Dalet turns into the shape of a letter Hey. Shezeu Tzedakah B'Hei Kanal. And that's the meaning, Tzedakah, not Tzedek, but Tzedakah with a Hey. Because the Hey has now brought it alive. You've energized and you've lifted up the Dal, the impoverished one. Lahaskil the Dal, Maskil el Dal. To Lahaskil the Dal, to be Mashpia and empower. And you could say Maskil, you could say also, I'll say the word educate, but to basically to empower the Dal, Bechinas HaMalchus, the level of Malchus, Lefisha Seif Maisa. And why does it have that power? Because the Lefisha Seif Maisa, the end of the action, remember, Ola B'machshava Tchila, Seif Maisa, the Berurim, the mitzvahs, of the refinements of mitzvahs down below, that end action, that final action of implementing these mitzvahs down below, that elevates even higher than the Chochma on its own. The Er Yosher, who Yuda Elyon, the Shem Havaya, the Er Chochma, which is the Yuda Elyon. So the Yuda Elyon of Chochma, of Shem Havaya, Er Chochma. Now we're elevating even higher than that. In other words, we're not just returning where we began. By going down and doing a mitzvah down below, we elevate it even higher than the Er of Chochma initially. Kanal b'Shem and Lamoyer, like we learned earlier, that a mitzvah does something that Torah Er also doesn't have, because it's fulfilling the mission of Dira B'Tachtenim. Torah Er illuminates and is the light that shines and tells us what to do. But it's the action, the safe maisa of a mitzvah, that, like he said, Kanal b'Shem and Lamoyer. It's not just Shem and Oyer. Torah is Torah Oyer. Shem and Lamoyer is the source of light. The Ner Mitzvah Shalamayla B'Torah Er. The candle of the mitzvah that's higher than Torah Er. Because you're fulfilling the Kavana El Yena in Etzem, in Atzmos. So as high as Torah Er is, and it is high because it's reflective of God's, but it's a revelation at the end of the day. And the mitzvah performs something that reaches even higher than that to the moed itself, the source of Eir. Like we learned earlier when he spoke about, I'll tell you what page it was. I think it was Shem Moed, probably page 420. 420, 421, and 422, I believe. I think it was earlier as well. Yeah, the bottom of page 418. That's the main thing. Or the end of page 418. Im Kain. So based on that, Harizeh B'chinas Halog V'Agba. So this Hamagbihi, this is a level of elevating and lifting. L'Eir di Yud of Chochma Descends B'chinas Hamoed Atzmei. So you're elevating not just the world, it's the physical world, elevating also the Yud of Chochma to the Moed itself, to the source of light, Shemamenu Mokar Koil, which is the source of it all. You're going all the way back to the source, because the kavanah of Teira Eir is not just to illuminate what God wants, it's to transform this material world. In other words, the kavanah of the blueprint is to build a house, build it, and the mitzvahs build it. And when you do that, you're reaching and elevating Hamagbihi. Also, the Yud of Hamagbihi is also being elevated. And that's what means that Dafka Tzedakah elevates the goy, the nation, as they are down below. Mitzvos. That's through mitzvahs. That's the Tzedakah which is called mitzvahs. Who Yud Yisrael, and now he's bringing the Yud, also connects to the Yud of Yisrael. The Neshama Yisrael begins with the Yud. Lias Li Reish. The Yud of Yisrael. So Yisrael is also made up of two words. Li Reish. You should be for me ahead. So Yisrael is actually becoming ahead. Li to godliness. Mamish. Acher abir de Shema. After the bir of Shema, where Chochma create that clarity and illuminates this dark world, now when you elevate it through the mitzvahs, it becomes lidei shemavarer b'maisa mitzvahs dafke. The actual refinement that comes through the actionable mitzvahs, shenasai dezegmilas chasodim ledalim. Through that you're bestowing, you're transmitting chesed to the poor. Shahuya yud taktano shebetecha dalet. The small yud that's within the dalet, shanayla lamaila mi yud of Chochma Hagduma, that elevates higher than the Yud of Chochma itself, mishum denotz tchilosim b'seifim dafke kanal, because as we learned before, the beginning is wedged in the end. V'zeu Hamagbihi liyud, and that's what means Hamagbihi liyud, not just Hamagbihi with a yud, it's Hamagbihi to the yud. Liyashei, make it into a hey idea, tzedakah shetaremim goy. Turning it into a hey through the tzedakah that elevates the goy, and with that you're also elevating the Yud of Chochma. Vidal. Vidal lemevin. And enough for those, the discerning ones, for the understanding ones. Okay, another paragraph we finished.
That means that the bottom line of everything that we learn about Torah compared to mitzvahs, but the bottom line that is sheresh of the mitzvah is the thing that gives the Torah the power. Correct?
I'm not sure what you're trying to say. There's something Torah has that mitzvahs doesn't have. There's something mitzvahs have that Torah doesn't have. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because before he learned Talmud Gadol Shemevel de Maisa, because Torah is Dafka Torah Eir. Nothing has the Oir that Torah has. Giluyim Torah is higher. But in Etzem, the mitzvahs fulfill the Kavanah Etzem. And that ultimately elevates Torah, yes. That's why Talmud Gadol Shemevel de Maisa, Dafka when it comes to Maisa. And the bottom of page 417, he said that very clear. That's like the mile of Torah Shebal Peh over Torah Shebiksav, because it brings it into that action. If that's what you mean, yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Where's the Tzedakah Shetoramim Goy? What's the context?
Tzedakah Teremim Goy? Well, the simple context is that charity elevates the nation, the people, when you give charity. The Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe explains Tzedakah Terem Goy, that Goy is the neshama says they come down below, like he said before. Like he said that I believe on where was it? Tzedakah Terem Goy, yeah. Well, we began learning today when we learned Shetaremim LeGoy Neshama, that it elevates the Goy. The neshama says they are down below as another nation. Elevates it all the way to Reim Musab Atzmus. That's what he's speaking about here. What Tzedakah does, what mitzvahs do. And the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, let me just look there. I think that's where he begins. Yeah, he speaks about it right here. Yeah, it compares it to chesed. It's embracing someone, v'yimini tichapkeni, and with your right arm you embrace me and elevate me. That's what mitzvahs do. Without mitzvahs, we are mortals in a material world and at the mercy of material life. And it's the mitzvahs the Torah that tells us the mitzvahs that elevates us. And here it's speaking about elevating us to the highest of levels. I think I'm going to stop here. Still has to explain what's Leshevis, Hamagbihi Leshevis, even though he did speak about it earlier on page 423, but the next paragraph is going to explain what's the Leshevis part. How does that fit in here? Well, we'll stop here. I think we covered a lot of ground here, relatively. So the end of the paragraph, middle paragraph on page 426. Any other questions? Okay. So this Maimer, we have another 8 pages to go. Yeah, Chavav Lamed Dalet. So we're closer to the end after, as I said, a 75-page Maimer. Yeah. So let's stop here.
Is it fair? Just real quick question, if I may. I was looking at the Alter Rebbe's Maimer just now, but coming back to where we were, I have to find it again. What page is it? 6. Remind me what page we're on. No, just in the Middler Rebbe. No, but that's
426. We're on 426.
Sorry. Yeah. The paragraph before the one we just finished, he was talking about tzedakah and how it adds the yud to the dalet and it uplifts the poor. That's that mitzvah specifically, tzedakah, and then he broadened it and saying all mitzvahs operate that way. Is that a fair summary?
He made it very clear that all mitzvahs are called b'shem tzedakah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the same inyan is because you're taking the precision of the Chochma of Torah to Mavarar the Shvalim, which is, let's say, us, or the state of nature without the introduction of the active introduction of Elokus into Dom Tzmei Medaber, that uplifts the entire creation. Is that what he's trying to say?
Yeah.
Okay. No, because I was processing a lot. I just wanted to make sure I got the gist of it. Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Okay. So we'll stop here, end of the paragraph, middle paragraph, page 426. Let me